Thank you, Elisa and Dominic, for inviting me to contribute a small token to this very important series of lectures on Near Eastern art, the aim of which is to emphasize the diversity and significance of these often too little appreciated works of art. In contrast to the previous lectures, I will not deal with large, but with tiny objects, more precisely with miniature representations on cylinder seals. Their tiny size of only a few centimeters and the sheer quantity of seals and their impressions known so far, which according to our estimates amount to about 150,000 pieces, has led to the fact that seal research, even more than research on other art genres, is considered a special discipline that many archaeologists are reluctant to deal with. Yet it is precisely the seals that allow us to continuously trace the development of art or the artistic implementation of ideas and concepts that were current at the time over a period of 6,000 years. Even if one disregards the stamp seals and only starts with cylinder seals, which appeared in the middle of the 4th millennium, they can still be traced over 3,500 years. Therefore, they are indispensable as a source for research on the longue durée of ideas of that time. Quite apart from this, they are also one of the most exciting genres of art in terms of content due to their simultaneously narrative and symbolic representations. And furthermore, one of the most aesthetically exciting pictorial media, as you can see here during the last minutes with this wonderful Akkadian seal depicting the Etana legend. I took the liberty to change the original title of the lecture a little bit, because in the course of preparation of this lecture, it occurred to me that this here is the much more essential question. What would they have known about Western Asian imagery without seals? And I mean, but they, the people who lived in the Near East at that time. To explain what I mean by this, let's start with this Uruk seal impression found in Susa, which shows as the dominant figure a tall standing bearded man in a long skirt killing 3 naked people in front of him with a bow and arrow in a bestial way that is drastically depicted. The victims are completely unprotected by their nakedness and also unarmed. Even the pleading for mercy of the long-haired man directly in front of the archer is of no use to him. He will, after the first arrow has pierced his thigh, receive a second deadly one, this time directly in the heart, where the tip of the arrow is already aiming. 2 smaller naked people, weakened by the arrows piercing them completely, are already unable to hold themselves upright and fall forward and backwards, respectively, to the ground. The arena for this scene, which can hardly be surpassed in brutality, is a building on a terrace, which is marked by its niched walls as a Chalcolithic temple, whereby the horns attached on the outside possibly indicate its location somewhere in Elam. Many more representations of the same bearded man are found on seals in Uruk, and indeed this person can be depicted on many slightly varying seals as the leader of his men fighting and killing bound enemies. Why is this big man depicted as the superior warlord, sometimes explicitly in the context of a temple? We know that the dominant person of that time was the ruler, who can be grasped for the first time in this period. The archaic texts from Uruk show that the En, which was his title, stood at the head of a very hierarchically structured society with extremely differentiated professions. However, this ruler could also be depicted in completely different aspects. For example, in the symbolic representation as a good shepherd who takes care of his flocks, and in the figurative sense of the land and the agriculture, which was one of the great economic factors of that time. That the ruler did this on behalf of the supreme goddess is made clear in the upper seal by the bundles of reeds, which are the symbol and pictogram of the goddess Inanna. But the ruler also held important functions in the rite or cult, and it was therefore often called a priest king. One sees him below, on the seal below, on a precious lapis lazuli seal from Uruk, on a ritual boat trip, how he and an altar of Inanna were driven by means of punting through the marshes. On the seal impression above from Chugamish, the big man is also being driven through the marshes on a large boat, but now he's sitting on a bull and holds two small persons at the leash. Further small persons carry standards and other equipment, which are probably also part of the obviously quite complex ritual procession. And finally, the ruler is also depicted on cylinder seals as a hunter sitting in front of his temple and shooting the most dangerous wild animals with bow and arrow from their huge wild boars and lions, as here on this cylinder seal impressions from Habuba Kebira South. On other seals from the same side, the ruler's soldiers are seen again torturing captives, so those seals here in blue, marked in blue. Almost identical seal impressions were also found in Chugamish. And this brings us back to the question posed at the beginning: why does the ruler have himself and his men depicted in such a combative manner and in many other aspects that represent the functions of a ruler? The answer is the places from which we have just seen the cylinder seals and their impressions are far apart, but they all belong to a network of Uruk trading stations. From Habuba Kebira to Uruk, it is 1,100 kilometers as the crow flies. To Susa and Chugamish, it's even 1,300 to 1,400 kilometers. All the yellow dots represent sites where relics of the southern Uruk culture were found, which had their largest centers in Uruk and Susa. The red squares indicate hybrid settlements. Actively, these centers established trading stations in distant regions and founded new settlements, some of which looked like copies of the mother sites. But how should the people in Habuba Kebira, in the area of today's Syria, get to know who had this great trading station built out of the ground and who had the enormous city wall and the temples built? How were they shown drastically what would happen to them if they resisted to endure the foreigners here? They learned it through the seals, for they were mobile, both the cylinders and the sealed pieces of clay and clay tablets. The images on them depicted all the characteristics of the new alien power in a very understandable way, even if the people did not speak the same language. In Uruk itself, there were indeed large-scale images of the king, both in the form of larger-than-life statues and in stele form. These heavy images, however, were immobile and could be seen at most by those who had access to the center of Uruk. I would even go so far as to say that cylinder seals were invented specifically to enable the propaganda of the earliest strict ruling structures and the complexity of the administrative units behind them to be depicted in greater detail, since cylinder seals offer much more space for storing information than the small areas of stamp seals, where narrative depictions are almost impossible. However, their main effect was that ideology spread over huge distances at the same time as goods were transported. The king, his system, the benefits, and the horrors were spread everywhere. This is one of many proofs of the fundamental role of seals as transmitters mentioned in the title of my talk. Seals were extremely mobile and therefore ideal transporters of image content. Only in recent years, however, has the role of images as actors been recognized and agency intensively studied. Alfred Gell's Art and Agency, an anthropological theory of 1998, has received much attention and critics, and I will certainly not discuss the receptions of his theory. However, it is especially true for Near Eastern art and merely common sense that art acts on its users, and that any kind of art, was it music, images, or artful decoration, could have been triggering feelings and creating interaction. And also this can be shown with these seals. No one can escape the feeling of fear of this king and his people bristling with power, and no one can escape pity for the victims. With this, I could now end this lecture, but I would rather like to have the effect but I would rather fill these reflections on what images can do with us, with life, and take you on a journey through time in our minds together. Perhaps I will be a bit provocative in this lecture, but my aim is also to have a very lively discussion after my talk. We are moving forward a bit in time. Please imagine that you lived in Mesopotamia in the 3rd millennium, in the early dynastic period 2 or 3, let's say in Lagash, Uruk, Kish, Tutub, Mari, Farah, or any other city you like. We are ordinary people, so you are free to choose whether you are a farmer, a fisherman, a pig's herdswoman, or a wet nurse. Now, my question to you. How many pictures have you seen so far in your life? I would like to say that you have never in your life seen a life-size or at least medium-sized picture of a human being, an animal, or even a large format picture of a scene. Perhaps you could have seen pictures in the king's palace, for example, panels with inlays that also show the treatment of prisoners by their own warriors, as here in Palace A of Kish. But you, as a herdman, had no access to the palace. It's rather unlikely from the outset that you would have been able to catch a glimpse of the pictorial works in tombs, certainly not in elite tombs such as those famous artworks in the Ur cemetery. However, if you had access to temples, you would have been able to see images. For example, here in Tutub, now Hafaji, you would have been able to see dozens of statues of mortal men and women in the Oval Temple, in the Sin Temple, the Nintu Temple, and you would have been seen statues of mortal men and women. You would see votive plaques with scenic narrative depiction of feasts, showing how the great feasts were celebrated with food and drink, music, and even athletic contexts such as wrestling. If you were very lucky, you might have even caught a glimpse of the anthropomorphic cult image. But unfortunately, for some reason, they had been denied entry into the temple. You could have seen a similar arsenal of images in the Inanna temple at Nippur, again statues of men and women, a couple, votive plaques depicting feasts, and an animal fighting scene. And even if you had lived in Mari, you would have been able to see only in the temples and in the palace pictorial works, which again thematize at scenic representations either the war or exceptionally also the celebration on the occasion of a birth, presumably because the queen or another high-ranking woman had given birth to a child. But you were never in Mari in your life. You were living in a small village up on the Upper Chabur. You guess what I want to say. Average people of the early dynastic period only had access to images in miniature in the form of seals. In fact, you would have known King Ishki-Mari much better in this way via his seal than via his statue who stood in the Ishtar temple. When, for example, a good with a clay sealed with his seal was transported to your site or village. This famous seal image drawn by Dominique Beyer many years ago is a wonderful example how many important details can be expressed on one seal. So King Ishki-Mari here depicts himself enthroned, which means his power. In front of him, a man pouring a libation to the symbols of various gods, expressing his piety. On the left, you have a contest scene, which I interpret as being the icon for the regime as the protector of justice in the country. And in the lower register, you have battle scenes expressing the militancy of Ishki-Mari and a victory scene with the head of the slain enemy on top of the chariot, expressing the king as the big victor. So many more ideas could have been transported to areas far away with his seal. Let's resume some aspects about the visibility of works of art. Great art was immobile, seals were spreading the pictorial ideas. Ironically, we today can open our books or computers to see how the ancient Near Eastern art of every single period looked like, but the people in these times had mainly the seals as sort of art at their disposal. Perhaps this changed slightly in the second millennium, when at least terracotta plaques and figurines were abundant. In the first millennium also much more images were publicly visible, but mainly in the Syro-Anatolian area, and somewhat less in Assyria and even much less in Babylonia. But for today, we will stay in the early dynastic period, and more precisely in the middle of the third millennium in the early dynastic 1 to 2 period. The background to this is the fact that our first excavation campaign at Faras this spring may provide new clues to the order of this extremely fascinating glyptic. Neither a temple nor a palace has been found at Farah so far, which is why almost no pictorial works of the early dynastic period are known from Farah at all, with the exception of hundreds of seal images. The already known seal impressions from Farah, the ancient city of Shurupak, originate predominantly from the excavations by the Deutsche Orientgesellschaft under the direction of Walter André and Robert Koldewey from June 1902 to March 1903, and they were processed in two large studies and outstanding dissertations after the primary publications by Heinrich and André. Once in the study by Norbert Karg, here at our institute, published in Bagdader Forschung 8, 1984, with the title Untersuchungen zur älteren frühdynastischen Glyptik Babyloniens, and once by Harriet Martin in her book Farah, A Reconstruction of the Ancient Mesopotamian City of Shurupak, Birmingham, 1988. And the latter one also reconsidering the seals of Farah and the stratified seals excavated by the University of Pennsylvania excavations in 1903. These seals open a whole big cosmos of ideas of that time, and there is really an explosion of motifs. These seals are among the most unconventional and the most colorful and the most exciting works of art in the Near East. There was obviously not yet a canonization of themes and motifs, and numerous artists seem to have experimented with the content, with the modes of representation and possibilities of composition. Most of the images I will show to you in the following are drawings from Alfred Wilhelm Bollacher. It took me a long time to find out who A. Bollacher is, because he's only mentioned in a little footnote and he never gets character, but this person was a real, was an artist who was doing this exceptionally detailed and beautiful drawings, all published in the book by Ernst Heinrich and Walter André Farah in 1931. So here, for example, these two seals of the ED2 period show on the top a creature with two bodies ending in snakes, and on the bottom you see a monster with four snake-like heads biting the tail of a goat in front of it. More fairy tales or fables are depicted in those seals. For example, on the top you see a bullman and another person plowing with the help of two lions. So transferring the everyday, daily plowing on the field to the mythical sphere of the, of another world. And below, finally, a scene where in the secondary scene you see a monkey playing a lyre or a harp. So also this a typical motif of a fable where animals do the usual tasks of human beings. This is the very beginning of the depiction of legend and myths who finally find their apogee, I would say, in these Akkadian seals. Also, the most exciting and exceptional things of that time, that is feasting, was depicted on these Farah seals of the ED2 period. On the top, you see to the right a seated person, probably a female deity, to which two men with a split skirt are bringing a bit vessel filled with beer, and another man bringing other goods to be consumed during these feasts. Please remark the peculiar headdress of these men wearing a flat cap, and the peculiar skirt which is split, and the front part taken up so that this very distinctive kind of garment is appearing, which exists only in this period. Another scene of a feast is depicted on the lower seal, where you see the by-program of a feast, namely wrestling men, and perhaps another man with the stick in the hand, who is the Schiedsrichter, sorry, I forgot the English word, the man who is judging the wrestling competition. Everyday scenes like hunting boar in the marshes are also depicted on these Farah seals. You see here these very nice boats from reed floating in these very shallow marshes, and the people with their lances attacking this wild boar. More boat scenes are depicted in this kind of a ritual boat processions, where you see a deity sitting in a boat, a man punting this boat forwards in the marshes, and another god, probably male god, pulling this boat additionally through the canals and the marshes. And the additional scene to the left is a typical contest scene of this so-called Mesilim glyptic or ED2 glyptic, where you see this very elegant style of the Lahmu, of the hairy hero, struggling with two lions on either side, a style which was called later by Harriet Martin the typical elegant style of the ED2 period. Most of the seals which we have seen now until now, and which you will see in the following, were found in the so-called Graben 1D, Graben 1DE, so trench 1DE, which you see here in this red rectangular, at the very top of the first trench, which was dug from north to south, not to count all the horizontal graben or trenches. So in this area, Andre and Heinrich report ashy debris, and in this ashy debris, hundreds of seal impressions were found. These seal impressions were studied by, as I told you, by Norbert Karg and by Harriet Martin, who gave us this order of the seals. So you see here of an excellent book in 1988, this table 13, which indicates how many seals were found in her Graben 1D, 1E. And the seals are ranging from the Jemdet Nasser period over to the ED1 early period, to the ED1 late period, and to the ED2 period. So you see here the number of impressions which she counts to these styles. And let me quickly show you typical examples for each of these styles. So for Harriet Martin, the first group is this Jemdet Nasser seal style. To the left, you see a typical very large image of a bull in this kind of city-style seal. In the middle, you see goats and geometrical ornaments resembling very much Jemdet Nasser seals, which are, for example, known from the Diyala region. And to the right, you see geometrical seals, which are typical in many sites for the Jemdet Nasser period, but which can also appear later, as Harriet Martin also states. The next period, ED1 early and ED1 miscellaneous, sees these seals, which mainly consists of walking animals, walking or crouching animals, as you see on these examples to the left, or on antithetically arranged walking animals. Here a bird of prey grasping two walking goats. The most fascinating example is this very tiny seal with 4 registers, who precisely shows in the lower 2 registers walking or crouching goats, very similar to those here. But in the upper register, so in this register here, it shows a contest scene with upright, rampant bulls and goats, and here again, upright and rampant goats, and a person here who is not very clear. And the uppermost register finally shows a boat scene where 6 people are sitting in a boat or are punting, and the same boat is pulled again, similar to the seal we just have seen. They are pulling again this boat through the marshes. So one of the most fascinating seals from Farah, who is attributed by her to the ED1 period. Finally, the ED1 late period, she's attributing these seals to this period, and you see very, very peculiar seals. My favorite one is here, this VA 6550, where you see 2 men, squat men, with this famous, this very peculiar split skirt. They are rendered in a very strange way that their face is only existing of a very, very large, pronounced nose, a large eye with a hollow around for the face, and this flat cap, nearly leaving no space for the upper part of the head. So this is very typical, and please keep in mind this type of man. We'll come back to it in a minute. These 2 men are attacking a huge animal, a lion, who is stepping on an inverted goat. And in the field you have strange objects which seem like a moon, crescent moon, and many, many stars perhaps above. The field is filled up with geometrical and other elements. Other examples are here on the bottom. The same man with the flat cap and the split skirt attacking or grasping animals who are in part walking on the ground and in part depicted upright. And finally, the ED2 styles, seals, which she classifies ED2 elegant style, and she's extremely right in doing so. This group consists of groups of animals in combat, often in symmetrical arrangements. A very frequent motif is the bullman, often in the pose of the master of animals, grasping to the right and left, wild animals. Other popular protagonists are the men with 2 tufts of hair. Here you see them here in a pair-like composition, probably also wrestling with each other. Then we have, of course, lions, bulls, goats, and other creatures. All these seal motifs are arranged in an elegant and delicate style and compositions. The bodies and limbs are depicted as extremely slender and often elongated elements. So while Harriet Martin attributes this to the typical mesolim and ED2 glyptic, Norbert Karg in his dissertation comes to a different conclusion. He claims, I cite, Verschiedenheit des Stils muss nicht notwendigerweise einen zeitlichen Unterschied ausdrücken. So the variety of style does not necessarily mean a difference in time, because he is stating as well this elegant type of the ED2 glyptic to the ED2 period, and also this type, so sorry, I have to go back, which by Martin is classified to the ED1 late period, but shows an extremely different style. So let's have a look what our new investigations in Farah have yielded and can contribute to this question. After having done several campaigns of survey between 2016 and 2018, we started the first excavation campaign February this year. And one of the areas we excavated was here, precisely this Graben 1DE. So this is our new contour map. You still see the trenches by the Deutsche Orientgesellschaft very clearly on the ground. And as you see on this lower image, this area, as all the site of Farah, has terribly been looted and extreme damage has done to it. So all these are looting holes. Fortunately, here this old trench by the DOG is still visible on the ground, and you can remark it here as this flat, light area, because the excavation hole dug just was filled up over the last 120 years with the light soil which was blowing into this hole. So this area, precisely this area, was spared by looters because they knew only where the soil is soft and dark we can make good finds, and they always spared this flat and light areas because they knew they could not find anything in it. So our aim was to figure out why were so many ceilings lying here. Was it really because over 300 years, so from the Jemdet Nasser to the ED2 period, this was a waste pit at the edge of the Mount of Farah? Is this possible to use a waste pit over such a long time? And the other question was, if so many door ceilings were lying here, hundreds of door ceilings, is this not a very clear sign that there must be an administrative building nearby? So our aim was to find indeed the building from where these ceilings had been thrown away as garbage. And in fact, because the map drawn by Andre was so precise, we could really find the edges of his Graben 1DE, as you see here. So this line here is the line until where Andre and his workmen were excavating in 1902. And this is the debris which is not yet disturbed. So this chocolate brown area is a tiny little part of this very, very large waste pit, a part of which was excavated, but much more is still in place and perhaps, inshallah, will await future excavations. We made only a very small sounding of about 1 meter wide and 2 meters in length. And you see here a continuous sequence of waste levels of ashy, brown, gray, reddish or chocolate brown material. And within this waste, heavily burned waste, as well little clay figurines and ceilings of various kinds. Due to our foreman, Rani, who was Toby and who was excellent, and due to our work over many days, we were able to find very interesting new ceilings. For example, the one I was just showing recently, shows a contest scene made up from very, very elongated bullmen. Here you see this bullman with very small hips, very, very elongated legs and a very long tail. More bullmen fighting, and this hero with the cups with his 2 bundles of hairs fighting with various animals. Another very exciting impression was this one, and I realized that another impression had already been found by the earlier excavators and drawn here. But apparently the seal impression in the Vorderasiatische Museum is not so clear, and therefore our new piece of clay allows a better reconstruction, which is essential. Because now we clearly can see here this monster in the middle is looking en face to the spectator. He is really bursting from power, and his eyes en face are really piercing the spectator. So a very impressive monster who is looking at us. But what is even more important, so this monster is holding up by the hind legs these 2 lions who are depicted in a terribly distorted way. But very important, now we can better distinguish the 2 men to the right and to the left who are attacking these lions. And so we see it is precisely this man in the flat cap, consisting mainly of a very big nose, in this split skirt who is attacking the lions. And this is exceptional because so far not a single seal of this so-called elegant the ED2 style had contained this element of this man with a flat cap and a large nose, which was attributed by Harriet Martin to the ED1 style. So already this seems to be an argument in favor of Norbert Karg's theory. Ceilings directly lying beside these mentioned ceilings look like this. So very simple rows of walking animals, one after the other. And fortunately also several examples of this fascinating 4-registered seal was found. You see that Alfred Bollacher only drew the the upper through registers of this seal, very fine walking bulls. Here this contest scene with the rampant animals, and here the beginning of this boat scene. And fortunately, our new ceilings allow to reconstruct this part better. Sorry, I had not yet the time to make a better drawing. I hope to do it very soon. But you see here, this figure is precisely the man in the split skirt who is attacking this rampant goat. And so more door ceilings with impressions of this seal were found to corroborate this interpretation of this man as the man with the flat cap and the split skirt. So this again is an argument that not only these horizontally walking and crouching animals appear side by these rampant animals, but also by this man with a split skirt and by more complex boat scenes. The artists of that time must have been really a genius, because minute renderings of animals were depicted on these seals. So this is an extremely fine seal in 2 registers. Here you see the animals side by side, and perhaps you see it better in this drawing. So 2 goats turning around their neck and this bird of prey grasping them, and a rampant lion with this very strange second hind part of a lion attached, an composition which was called by Anton Mordgat as ligatur, and I don't know if in English it's ligature, or so I use the expression ligatur. And on the top you see this row of marching animals. The fascinating thing is that in this same pit 1DE, Andre and Koldewey had found many of these clay tablets, which are now mostly stored in the museum in Berlin, which show sketches of various animals and other things. So, for example, here you have the examples of 4 sketches of walking bulls. You see the many erasures of the artist. Here you see it extremely well. So the artist was trying to draw the legs of a bull, and he made a mistake. Here this one was erased and other legs added and so on. Here you see a large depiction of something, and on the top a tiny little bull. So you really have the impression these were the trial pieces of the seal cutters who learned how to draw bulls, first in a larger scale and then in this very, very small miniature scale, in order to be able to draw also these the same animals on seals, which in my opinion were produced nearby. So really a very similar rendering of these bulls, which enabled then the seal cutters to make these tiny little drawings in the seals. Other motifs of the same pit 1DE are these rampant goats side by side, symmetrically arranged, other goats and lions. And so if you compare this to the seal images, you see exactly the same composition of these goats here, of the lion heads, and in this seal, a combination of rampant goats and these walking animals. And finally, sketches of bullmen fighting, and these bullmen with a face en face have also very good parallels, this time in the so-called elegant style seals from Farah. So we think that there were seal cutters in the area nearby who were trained in drawing these excellent animals and creatures in order to be able to make to produce very fine seals, which apparently were used in big numbers in this administrative building who was nearby. And fortunately, let me say, we also probably found a part of this large building. So this is the floor, the burned floor, and immediately behind, so this is the wall, behind this large building, the seal pit is starting. This tiny bit which we excavated, and all this and much larger was the seal pit, which was already excavated by Andre and Koldewey many years ago. So perhaps this is indeed the administrative building where the seals were used, and perhaps also where the seals were produced by these ED seal cutters. And finally, to come back to one of the most exciting seals, which has already been known in many, many impressions, most of them on door peg ceilings. We found also a very large door peg ceilings. We figured out that indeed size matters. So This seal is by far the largest, and there, unfortunately, the scale of the drawings as well in the book of Heinrich and Andre and in the book by Harry and Martin are not right. This seal is 3.5 centimeters high, much larger than all the other contest scenes which were found here in Farah. And if you compare other similar scenes, which we found also in this pit here, I put it in the same scale, you see immediately who was the boss of these administrators in these administrative buildings. They are so much smaller, these other contest scenes, and they are also depicted in a less delicate manner, so that I think size indeed matters. You can't see all the details on this tortured clay pieces, but you immediately see these very, very large legs and limbs and parts of these animals if the size is so very peculiar. And with this, I come to my conclusions. I hope that I have shown that seals were the ideal transmitters of concepts and ideas in general in the Near East. They were one of the very few works which were visible, works of art which were visible for everybody, everywhere. Very clearly, different styles existed side by side in most of the periods, and they were heavily depending on the region, on the function of the administrative units where they were used, or on the individual style of the seal cutters, which in this case must be the case in Farah. And finally, I think that size matters, because size immediately was indicating the hierarchy of the seal owners. Thank you very much.